One moment, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and then we will start the ad video and then the presentation.
Kenectra creates opportunities for people living with disabilities by providing information, resources, and programming geared towards greater inclusion and quality of life. Check out some of the programs we offer through our online learning platform, Connect Together, including our Service Mondays, where we highlight a local organization or initiative, Wednesday Chair Yoga with Bobby Seal-Kobiski, Thursday Adapted Fitness with Megan Williamson, Friday Rotating Dance Classes hosted by Janice Lawrence and Joanne Cuff, and other initiatives including presentations by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association's GrowABLE program and our Perspective series.
Also coming up on July 22nd, we have an Accessible Community Forum on accessible housing in British Columbia.
Check out our updated programs calendar on our website, Kenectra.org, or find us on Facebook at Kenectra Society.
Okay, well, that is it on my end, so I'll pass it on to Jordan now.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Debbie, maybe if you'd be able to let me know that you're able to see my screen just to make sure that that's all working, that would be great.
Yeah, I can see everything.
Fantastic. And I see we've got Pat on here as well. Hey, Pat.
Hey.
I'm not sure if we've actually met before, Pat, or if you've been on any of the other live ones with me.
I was in a call last week and it was about accessible gardening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, what I'm going to do is go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And so yeah, I've just dropped us into presenter mode here. And what we'll do is we'll kind of just start jumping straight into things. And today it's all focused on succession planting. And this is kind of a topic or part of gardening that I've really started getting into over the last kind of 1 to 2 years here. It's just been like a really cool way to kind of end up getting so much more out of the garden over the course of the season and be expanding and extending the season. So it's a topic that, yeah, I've really enjoyed diving into the last couple of years here. And so I think everybody is familiar with me, but for anybody watching the recording, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil. And I created Mind and Soil with the intention of introducing 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So I think one thing that all of us share is that when we're out there in the garden, there's such a sense of peacefulness and calmness and stillness out there. And that's something that we aim to bring to as many people as possible. And a big part of how we go about doing that is through education like this and kind of just being a support in any way that we can be. So if you have quite literally any gardening questions over the course of the season and into the off season, you can just ask them as a comment on any one of our YouTube videos on our channel, and you're going to get a response from me like within 24 hours. So really going to kind of be playing a role supporting in any way that we can all through the season here. And that YouTube channel is just youtube.com/mind and soil. Or if you just searched on YouTube Mind and Soil, you'd come across us straight away. So it's really fun interacting with folks all through the season there, and hope to be kind of exchanging some comments and stories, some successes, some failures with each of you over the course of this season and into the years ahead. And so to begin diving into succession planting, what I'd love to just kind of cover off on from a high level before we get into the more tactical stuff is some of the benefits to it, or why it can be such a great kind of practice to begin building out and incorporating into the gardening that you're already doing. And so the first one is that it purely straight up allows us to really, really increase our yield. Because now anytime that something is coming out of our garden, succession planting is the process of getting something new in there that's going to have enough time to reach maturity and harvest. So as an example, when I pull out radishes, I can be putting new radishes right back in. And about 40, 45 days later, I've got a whole new set of radishes ready to enjoy, rather than just letting that space go dormant for the remainder of the season. So our yield really starts going through the roof when we start getting serious about succession planting. Next, it allows us to really extend the season. So we can be growing and really starting a second crop of vegetables right around now in July that we're going to be harvesting in September, October. And then we can even begin to use the garden as a little bit of a storage unit and leave them into the ground and be harvesting in November and December. I think last year I had Brussels sprouts from my garden on Boxing Day right after Christmas. So we really can be kind of enjoying the garden for a much longer period of time. Now, continuing from there, a kind of unique part about succession planting is that some of our crops, such as broccoli, is very susceptible to bolting when we grow it into the summertime. So this was my broccoli last year. It was growing amazing. Like, you look at the size of these leaves here, but then the heat dome hit. And so all of that broccoli bolted. And then I didn't get those beautiful heads of broccoli that we kind of dream of getting. But if you were to plant it in July, right around now, and start those seeds, there's a long enough window that we're going to be able to get the most out of those warm, sunny days for it to put on its foliage growth. But then as it reaches maturity, the temperatures, rather than getting hot in the peak of summer, are actually getting cooler. So there's a lower likelihood of it bolting and a higher likelihood of us then getting that beautiful head of broccoli. And on top of that, when we grow into the fall, the flavor on a lot of vegetables actually improves. And the reason why this happens is because as the weather gets colder and colder, the plants, they don't want to freeze. And so what they end up doing is they convert all these starches into this sugary antifreeze that helps protect them. But because it has that sugary element to it, when we then eat it and harvest it, it ends up having this much kind of like more robust and deep flavor to it. And so the kind of vegetables like beets and carrots and kales and broccoli as well, they all end up actually tasting even better when we're growing them as a succession crop into the fall. And then the last piece, which is probably my personal favorite, is that it just gives us a second chance on a whole bunch of crops. So a couple of years ago, I grew some potatoes and I planted them really, really shallow. And you can see here where that kind of like white turns to green, that's where the soil level was. And so what that means is that there was only about 2 inches worth of stem for tubers to even develop off of to then ultimately put out little tomato or potatoes like this one here. But I learned from that, and then I planted a succession crop much deeper that I then harvested at the very end of October. And take a look at that. So I was able to apply all of those learnings, and rather than waiting until the next season, I was able to start just kind of experimenting and playing around with it, seeing, will this give me a better crop? And so now, like, one of the most kind of beneficial parts of gardening and most enjoyable parts of gardening is that constant learning process. And so by doing succession planting, it gives us double the number of times that we're able to ultimately be getting learnings from it. And therefore, we're improving twice as fast, and our crops are getting better and better each time around. So succession planting, just a couple of the reasons why I absolutely love it. And it kind of then begs the question, how do we go about planting a succession crop? And so the probably biggest tip that I can share from my experience succession planting over the course of the last couple of years now, it's a fairly straightforward one, but one that doesn't really like immediately jump to mind. And that biggest tip for succession planting is simply to have all of your supplies on hand and ready to be put to use. And the reason for this is because it's kind of like, you know, when you're running around all busy and you don't have the ingredients to cook a meal. Well, the likelihood of then cooking up that meal is much lower because you have to go to the grocery store, you got to pick up this, you got to pick up that. But if you've had a busy day, but then you have everything already at home to cook up that meal, well, then it's like, perfect. I can just get into my dinner plan now and enjoy cooking this dinner rather than having to worry about running to the grocery store, or in this instance, to the nursery. So for myself, what I do in kind of like June or so is I start getting all of my succession planting supplies ready. And then I just put them outside into this little storage area that I have. So now, because like I absolutely love spending some time in the garden in the evening. And after I've done a couple of things, if I've still got 15, 20 minutes before I'm, getting on to my next thing, it's the perfect little window of time just to grab a pack of seeds from my little succession planting corner and then head over to the garden and get them started. So in that kind of set of supplies that I have or on hand at my in my storage shed there, I always have a whole bunch of packs of seeds that I like to plant as succession crops. And we're going to go through a couple of my favorite over the course of this session. Then, of course, I've always got my little tags because I like to be doing different experiments and kind of just writing down what did I do here versus in another area. Then on top of that, we need something to be starting our seeds in a lot of the times because the garden, it's still growing those radishes or those broccoli. So the garden, in a lot of instances, is full. If we were to start in seed cells, though, we can get them started as those other first crops are hitting maturity and getting ready to harvested, and then we can transplant them in. And so that also means that I always have some seedling mix on hand. And then for any direct sowing that I do, I use worm castings to cover them and then organic fertilizer to feed them. And of course, I've always got my hori knife close by somewhere if I haven't lost it for any of the little garden tasks that I'd be doing while succession planting there. So which crops do we want to be growing from a succession planting perspective? Well, the best way to go about this is to break it down into fast crops and long crops. And so starting with our fast crops, a couple of my favorites on this front here are arugula, beans, beets and turnips, bok choy, pak choy, both in there would work, kale, lettuce, peas, specifically sugar snap peas for me, radishes, and spinach. And so quite literally, just at the beginning of this week, I started another succession round of beans, beets, turnips, peas, and radishes. So if you're thinking maybe I missed the window, maybe it's a little bit too late, it is not too late at all. There is plenty of time still in the calendar to be starting a succession crop and for it to fully reach maturity and ultimately be ready to harvest. So those are a couple of my favorite kind of faster crops. And the reason why I call them fast crops is because from the point of us starting that seed to it being ready to harvest is about 50 to 60 days, so less than 2 months, and we're harvesting it and enjoying it. And so because of that, we can plant those directly into the garden, which is called direct sowing. And so to do that, all that we need to do once that area is available is we want to add 1 inch of worm casting seedling mix or just a compost to the area that we're planting into. So again, this is our kind of a philosophy of always building the soil, right? Our soil is like our bank account for our plants that we're trying to grow. And as they grow, they're going to be withdrawing nutrients from that soil. And so we need to fill that bank back up so that the next plants that are going into it aren't going into an empty bank account, but rather have everything that they need in order to be growing big and strong. So the first thing that we do is we add either compost or our worm casting seedling mix to ensure that there's a nice kind of just even layer of nutrients working their way into the bed there. Now that we've got that down, the next thing that we want to do is space out our seeds. So in this instance, I just use a spacing tile and I pop it down and then I'm just poking holes in for where I'm ultimately going to be placing the seeds. And so in that instance, I think this is radishes that I was planting here and I'm doing 9 per square foot. And if you're wondering at all in terms of like what spacing to be going with, just leave that as a comment on any one of the YouTube videos and I can send over to you our actual spacing guide here. And then obviously if you're doing just a row or a line, then you just have to draw that with your hori knife and then you can plant directly into it. So we've now got kind of like our space in the garden prepped and measured out. Next thing that we need to do is place our seeds into the garden. And again, these are our fast crops that we're going to be direct sowing right into the garden. And what I'm doing is I'm placing 3 seeds into each one of the little divots that I've created there. And so the reason why I place 3 seeds into each divot is because that gives me 3 chances to ultimately have one of them germinate. And so if I only put 1 plant in there, then, or sorry, only 1 seed in there, then there's a chance that it doesn't germinate and then it ends up being a bare spot. But by putting 3 in there, at least one of them is going to germinate. Generally 2 or 3 of them will germinate. And in that instance, you can then just pick the one that's growing the biggest and the healthiest, and then kind of thin out the other 2, just nip them out and allow the one to grow so it's got all the space that it needs there. And so once we've done that, the thing that I love to do is I then cover them with worm castings instead of garden soil. And I cover them with worm castings because worm castings, they retain a ton and a ton of moisture. And so for our seeds to germinate, they need to be in a warm environment and a moist environment. And so by covering them with worm castings, this is essentially giving them a environment where a high amount of moisture is going to be retained so that they are always surrounded with that moisture. And then once again, going to have a higher likelihood of germinating and beginning to grow. And on top of that, it means that immediately from the point that they germinate, they're surrounded with nutrients from the compost and now all kinds of incredible bacteria and microbial life from the worm castings. And so I did an experiment where I started a bunch of seeds, and these ones I covered with worm castings, and these ones I just covered with more of like a standard sterile seed starting mix. And we can see just how much bigger they grew. More of them germinated. They're bigger, they're greener, they're healthier, they're more lush when they were covered with the worm castings there. So a really cool, just kind of like hack that will allow you to get not only a higher germination rate, but also bigger and healthier plant babies. And so then after that, all that we need to do is add some water so that they are, you know, again, in that moist environment to begin to germinate. And then they have everything that they need in order to go through that germination process and begin to grow. So normally what happens is that 3 weeks later, we've got all of these beautiful plant babies. And this is that thinning process where I just go down, I find the biggest one, and then I either pull the other two out like that, or you could pinch them or use pruning shears as well as different options to thin them out there. And so just like that, I'm thinning down to one. And before you know it, like those are going to be fully kind of taking over that area. It's going to be a blanket of leaves with all the beautiful, in this instance, radishes growing beneath the surface there. And so after I've thinned them out, what I'm doing is I'm then adding a little bit of organic fertilizer, about 1 tablespoon per square foot. And that's giving them, again, kind of like that next big boost of nutrients to go through their growing phase. So they have kind of everything that they need to reach their fullest potential. And sure enough, not that long after, we've got all kinds of garden goodies to be enjoying there. So that's what I wanted to cover off on the shorter crop side. I'm just going to pause for a moment to have a sip of water. And if there are any questions that anybody has, feel free to hop off of mute and just ask those, or go ahead and share them in the chat function. Either one works.
My question is, I have a mole. Is he going to be eating all this vegetables? Do you know?
Has he been eating any of your vegetables thus far?
I haven't done any vegetables yet. I'm scared of them.
So the only way to like fully find out is to try, because it's very possible that he's got other, you know, kind of like food sources that he already depends on and goes to.
Right.
And as a result of that, might leave yours alone.
Right.
So best case scenario, we plant and he doesn't even realize it, and you get some nice garden goodies coming out from it. Radishes and turnips are great ones to go with because the growing cycle on them is really, really short. So you'd be able to have them in the ground for not too long and be able to see that, yep, he hasn't ate them. Perfect. We're all good. Now, if he does get to them, or she, our little mole friend, and ends up causing damage, then the way that you would go about kind of like mole proofing your area is that at the end of this season, you'd probably actually want to lay chicken wire at the base of the bed. So we would get all of the soil out. We'd put chicken wire down at the bottom so that he can't get in from down below. And then around the top of the bed, you'd put some form of a cover. That could be a floating row cover. It could be netting. You could even build a little bit of like a kind of like like a chicken wire cage over top, so that there's now a physical barrier that will prevent that mole from getting into your garden goodies. So we protect it from above and from down below as well. And that's something that I do say with my strawberries. I've got a cage that goes around them so that the birds can't get to them as they hit maturity there. So that would be the, that would be the way that I would approach it. I'd plant, fingers crossed, nothing happens. And then if something did happen, then I would build more of like an actual management strategy for said pest.
Thank you.
Great question. Any other questions before we continue along here? Perfect. So moving on to our longer crops, these are the crops that are going to take a greater number of days to reach maturity, right? So for our spinach, arugula, our radishes, those are all fast crops. We're going to be able to harvest them within 45 to 60 days. But then we've got some longer crops that take just a little bit more time, like those potatoes that I showed a little bit earlier. And so for them, we really want to make sure that we're getting them into the ground kind of like as soon as possible so that they have enough time in order to grow and hit maturity there. So what does that look like? Well, the first piece here is that we have actually, I'm going to share that piece in just a second. First, I'm going to go through 10 of the kind of like longer crops that I really enjoy to grow here. And so on this front, broccoli, as we've already kind of alluded to, cauliflower in the exact same family, potatoes, which we've touched on, carrots, that's what I always follow my garlic after. So I plant carrots where I had my garlic and where I harvested out of. Parsnips or winter squashes, cabbage. Zucchini is a really cool one because zucchini is so susceptible to powdery mildew. And so rather than battling the powdery mildew, what you can actually do is just start a succession crop of powdery mildew and then pull the old kind of like powdery mildew one out and pop in the new crop of really nice, healthy zucchinis. And then from there, we've also got kale, and onions would be like a really long one, which we would be overwintering. So those are some of our longer crops. And it really goes to show that you can kind of like succession crop anything that you would like. It's just a matter of making sure we've got enough growing days in the season. So in order to figure that out, I actually put together a succession planting guide where I go through every single vegetable like arugula and kind of approximately how many days until harvesting. So as you can see here, it's around 45, right? It's sitting halfway between 30 and 60 days there. Basil, it's a little bit longer, about 75 days. Beans, they're about 60 days. And so this goes through every single vegetable so that you can be seeing, okay, if I wanted to be growing, let's say, I've just got that in the way there, broccoli, that's going to be about 110 days or so. I need to make sure that I'm starting those seeds at least 110 days before that first frost of the season when they're going to kind of stop growing. So in this guide, it actually walks us through exactly how to work backwards for the crops that we love. So let's take that example and let's run with it a little bit. Let's say that we wanted to grow broccoli here. And so the succession crop in this instance is broccoli. Now, the first thing that we need to do is kind of define the end of our season. So when is our first frost? And to figure that out, all that you need to do is just go to Google and search your city and first frost. So I looked up Squamish, first frost. The first result that came back here said October 5th. However, I looked at a couple of other ones that showed up on the first page here, and some of them were saying October 15th. So I know that it's going to be kind of somewhere in and around that mid-October range. Again, it's going to vary every single season just based on what Mother Nature gives us and the cards that she deals us in that year. So what I'm going to go off of is a date of October 10th as kind of like the end point of my season. Now I go into that succession planting guide and I find broccoli. And as we just kind of alluded to, broccoli, it's about 110 days or so to ultimately get to harvesting. So now I add that into the guide that I have here. So the days to harvest is 100. And so now we can just kind of use those two pieces of information to determine what is our required seed starting date. And this is like one of my like favorite things to do where I think the internet is just like magical. All that you need to do is go to Google and just write 100 days to October 10th. And that tells you then that Saturday, July 2nd is 100 days until October 10th. Let's say we want to do something a little different, like 90 days to October 10th. it just updates it to that's now Tuesday, July 12th. So it's a really, really good tool to understand, okay, if I know that I need 100 days for this to reach maturity, then I need to be starting on October 2nd or October 12th or October 7th, whatever it ends up being based on that first frost date. So this really takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And so what I do from there is I just pop that in as July 2nd. And I know now that for my broccoli, I want to be starting that in and around July 2nd. And full kind of like transparency on this front. What I end up doing with my succession planting now that I've been through it is like in that first week of July, whenever I've got some time in there, I just start all of my succession plants. So I started my broccoli, I started my cauliflower, I started my carrots, I started my beets, I started my turnips, a couple other things as well. I got some potatoes in the ground. So I really look at that kind of like first window of July as when I just start all of my succession planting. If for anybody that's kind of watching this, you haven't started it yet and it's past that first week of July, don't sweat at all. Like by all means, get it started, because even if it isn't quite a long enough window for you to get that succession crop that you want, you now have a year of succession planting experience that you're going to be able to roll into next year to have an even better succession crop. So there's lots and lots of value for starting, whether it is the first week of July, the third week of July, the first week of August. The most important part is just doing some form of a succession crop, knowing that you're going to get learnings from that you can compound into successive seasons. So now that we know that we're going to be starting our seeds at the beginning of July for myself, maybe beginning of August for somebody else, the first thing that we want to do is fill up our seed cell with worm casting seedling mix. So I go and grab my seed cells and then I fill it up basically all the way to the top, about maybe 1 centimeter or so from the top, once I give them a little nudge here in just a second. All righty. So we've got those filled up, and as you can see, I'm giving that little nudge. So there's a little bit of space at the top, because then I add 5 seeds into each one of those seed cells. Exact same concept as when we added 3 seeds into each of the divots. We're just looking to have multiples germinate so that we can have our pick of the litter and make sure that we're working with the absolute best seedlings. And then once I have 5 in, I add 2 turkey basters of water to each of them. So turkey baster, I find to be probably the best watering tool for seed starting. It allows us to add enough water, but not too much water. And it forces us to kind of slow down and do it in a couple of rounds, which allows for that moisture to work its way all the way through the seedling mix. So we've got our seeds in there. We've got some moisture in there. All that we need to do now is just cover it with another 1 centimeter of seedling mix, so that there's now going to be something covering the seeds, and that's going to hold moisture as well to give them that higher likelihood of germinating, just like so. And then I give those a little nudge, and then I'm going to add a little bit more moisture. So 1 to 2 more turkey base, and then those babies have everything that they need in order to grow. And if you're wondering, like, again, why am I starting these ones in seed cells? The reason behind that is because my garden right now, it's full. It has everything in it. It still hasn't been harvested. And any of the areas that I have harvested, I've planted fast crops directly in there. So that means that I need to be starting these things in seed cells in order to get that overlap in the season and get enough days until that first frost date. And then I'm going to transplant them into the season once they germinate, which, speaking of, 3 weeks later, our plant babies have now grown. They've germinated. They're looking really green, really lush. They're kind of chomping at the bit to be transplanted into the garden. This lines up perfectly with when I'm harvesting things out of the garden. So in about 2 weeks from now, I can see my garlic coming out. I can see a bunch of potatoes coming out. I'm not sure what else I have in there, but a lot of garden space is going to become available. Cabbage as well, and broccoli as well there. So what I do at that point in late July is I first harvest, probably my favorite day of the year, better than my birthday, better than any holidays, harvesting garlic. It's just the best. Look at that baby right there. Incredible root system on it. A full bed of it was coming out, all kinds of beautiful heads of garlic. I'm really, really looking forward to how they're doing this year as well. So they're all coming out of the garden. That means that I now have a full 4-foot by 8-foot bed that's empty. But remember, our soil is our bank account. When I put each of those in, they were one teeny tiny little clove of garlic. Now it is a huge head of garlic with a stem, all the foliage coming off of that. That is withdrawal, 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 withdrawal. We need to be putting some deposits back into our soil bank. The way that we're going to do that is first adding compost. So we're going to put kind of like, again, 1 inch across the bed. And then in each of the transplant holes, we're going to be adding 1 handful of worm castings and 1 tablespoon of our organic fertilizer, the 4-4-4 superfood. So just like that, we've now kind of made our deposits in the form of compost, worm castings, and organic fertilizer so that the nutrients are right back up to full. And whatever we plant in there is now going to have everything that they need to grow big and strong. So we continue from there by actually transplanting our plant babies into the garden. These are our succession crop that we have planted. Those are beets right there. That's one of the longer ones. They're going to need that full kind of like 100-day windows. And all that I'm doing is just popping them into that hole that I put together and then added the worm castings and organic fertilizer to. It's got everything that it needs in there to now be growing big and strong. And so to begin kind of wrapping up here, what we do a couple months down the track is that those babies, they've just been hanging out, they've been growing. And so now in kind of like October, we've got beautiful carrots that are ready to be harvested. And then there's some beets in there as well that are looking really, really good and happy. And so we've planted all of those after we harvested our garlic. And we're now able to be harvesting those out in mid to late October. And guess what I'm doing on that exact same day? I'm putting another deposit back into my soil bank, and I'm putting all of the cloves of garlic back into that bed to begin to grow for the next 9 months. So that bed is being put to use 365 days out of the year there. And so once we have gone through the harvesting process, we now have fresh garden goodies coming out of the garden in the late kind of like depths of fall there, right as we're leading into winter. So again, these potatoes, I harvested those right around like October 30th or October 31st. Those beets, those carrots that I just showed you, I put those together into like a really, really yummy kind of like winter salad with kale that I had growing in the garden still as well, some goat cheese, some candied walnuts. It was so good. So there's all kinds of just really, really cool things that we can be doing with succession planting, from getting all that extra bounty, harvest, and yield from the garden, all the way through to extending the season and getting those second chances on some of the crops that we want to be trying a little bit harder on or giving it another go on. But folks, that's everything that I wanted to cover off on here, and more than happy to answer any questions that might have come up throughout there.
A question.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on companion planting as a sort of spin on succession planting?
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. And it's yes, it's something that you can be doing all through the year, and really, really good, especially in like smaller spaces, right? To kind of like fully maximize the space. And then the biggest question is just kind of like, what plants go well with other plants and what plants don't go well with other plants. And so, Pat, what I want you to do afterwards is just Google companion planting West Coast seeds. And I might actually even have it on my desktop here. And then what you're going to do after you Google that is that you're going to look up the second link. And that second link is their companion planting guide. And it is like hands down the best resource that I've seen on companion planting. It goes through like every single vegetable and has a little green dot beside it for like these plants go well with it. And then a red dot beside it for like these plants don't go well with it. So now you can focus on like, you start with your most favorite crops, right? Like if tomatoes are what you for sure want to have in your garden bed, then you go and look up tomatoes. And then you find from there, okay, I can plant these other crops alongside them. And so now you've got your favorite crop in there, but you've also kind of maximized your space by finding the best companions for them.
Yeah, it's often that big gap, the garlic leaves after you've harvested them. You're kind of
Yeah.
like, kind of, big commitment there.
Yeah. So for myself, yeah, it's something that I've really, I guess, like reworked over the last 2 years, because now like I plant my garlic around October 20th,
Okay.
and that grows all the way till around like July 25th or so, depending on the year.
Mhm.
And so on July 1st, right around that first week of July, that's when I start my succession crop. So they have 3 weeks of growing in their seed cells
Okay.
while the garlic is finishing. And then on, again, around July 25th, I harvest the garlic out. I put my kind of like deposit back into the soil bank, and then I transplant in whatever that succession crop is going to be. And so for this year, that's going to be broccoli, that's going to be turnips, that's going to be beets, and that's going to be carrots going into that bed.
You got it all lined up.
Yeah, and the timing on it ends up working out perfectly, because all of those are hitting maturity and getting ready to be kind of harvested as the garlic is kind of getting to that point of being ready to go back into the ground. So that's like a cycle that I've found just works really, really well.
Great. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm on the West Coast Seeds page, and I'm kind of not seeing anything that says specifically some companion
Okay.
planting. There's a crop planting tool. There's a regional planting chart.
Let me.
If you could just put your link in the chat, that might.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to, I just turned off my screen share so I can open it up. Here we go. Okay, I've just popped that into the chat function. So go ahead and click on that, and then it'll take you to like a document that you're able to download.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Yep. Didn't find that. Okay. Yeah. Great. We'll do that.
Yeah, it really is amazing, that document. It's so cool that you mentioned succession planting there as well, because I think that's kind of like the next horizon for me to like really be sinking my teeth into. I kind of have the benefit of like I kind of have the benefit of a good amount of growing space, because I've converted like every square foot of available space in my yard to garden space.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, like I'm not growing for a family or a bunch of people or anything along those lines, so I don't need to be maximizing yield. But there's a lot of ways that I could pull even more out of the garden, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, I think for me, I grow a lot of flowers too. So I'm always thinking of some of the beneficial properties of flowers like calendula and marigolds to kind of keep away pests and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And then you get the nice, color from the flowers. So
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I put in some flowers, a big portion of my garden this year actually for cut flowers. And right now, actually, where I'm kind of dialing in from is where I work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is at a cut flower farm. So I was just planting probably about 50 or 60 dahlias into a bed that we had just built out there. So yeah.
And Whistler?
It is just before Whistler. Yeah. It's called the Brew Creek Center. Have you heard of it before?
No, what's it called? Root?
The Brew Creek Center. And so it's historically been more of like a wedding venue and convention center venue, but everything's shifting towards food and flower production and education now. So
In a new direction. Okay, I see that.
what's
Well,
that?
I was a florist for a while, and it's really sad how much of a carbon footprint a lot of flowers have because they're shipped from so far.
Totally.
People get
That's like
obsessed about certain flowers, and they're not aware of where they come from, just like fruit and vegetables, I guess, too. But the more that we can do locally, makes a lot more sense.
Oh, totally. Yeah. If you're ever in this area on like a Sunday evening, be happy to take you for like a little bit of a walk through it. I'll just show you from like where I am right now, because the upper part here, it's all landscaped. It's 12 acres in total. And it's like a stunningly beautiful landscape. So, I mean, you can see the building behind me here, just kind of how nice it is inside. But then like when you look out the window,
Oh, nice.
there we go.
Yeah.
And so like there's a river that's like right down there
Yeah.
running through the property. Up that way, there's like a meditation hut. There's a pond just down there. And then there's what on the other side of the property, that's where we're putting in all of like the you know, the flower pieces and the food production pieces. So it's a big like infrastructure project or work at the moment, I suppose you could say.
So the focus, instead of having events, it's going to be more education or producing like on a commercial level, or
Educate, and then like you alluded to in terms of like the flowers, like actually selling them locally, so that those that don't want to be buying from something that's getting shipped halfway across the world have an option.
right? Okay, so there's some education to do with the florists, and then comparing prices, I guess, to be competitive.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, all the pieces to figure out.
Yeah, and you know, any way you can involve the indigenous community, I think would be interesting as well, because there's some traditions there as well with medicinal plants and different ways of looking at land use. So
Totally, yeah. I'm really interested on that front from like an education and from a school perspective as well. So teaching kids.
yeah, I just did a cedar weaving class and did this really awesome bracelet.
Oh, beautiful.
It was
Wow.
surprisingly easy. It took long enough, like it was a couple hours, but you know, there was an indigenous teacher, and he was telling us legends about different spirit animals, and it was like a super cool experience. So
Whoa, that sounds
yeah,
amazing. Where, I guess whereabouts was that, or where was the class?
yeah, I was actually on Commercial Drive at the Britannia Center. So they have a community of Indigenous elders that come together, and it's every Wednesday. And because now I guess I get to be an elder, I'm over 55, so I can kind of participate in that. But you know, I think urban Indigenous people are kind of feeling like they lack a bit of a context
Mm,
to their culture. A lot
mhm.
more resources are available to people living on reservations. Uh,
Gotcha.
so it was really interesting to hear about their experiences and how they feel a bit disconnected from the land.
Mm,
And weaving, and cedar particularly, like cedar is such an important material.
mhm.
Harvesting it is a very important cultural practice. So learning all of that, and then
Oh,
to, you know, some of them were weaving the Salish hats. If you've
yep,
seen ones that have
yep.
quite a bit of work in that, which is
Can
really cool.
imagine.
You get to wear them around and do different things. So
Yeah.
and then Kwantlen College or University, sorry, here in Richmond, they have a project on the Garden City lands. I'm not sure if you've heard about what they're working on there.
I have vaguely heard a little bit about that, or I believe it's that project. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been just started volunteering with the Richmond Center for Disability, and they have a couple of plots in the community garden area. So they're trying to offer opportunities for inclusive gardening, which,
Whoa.
you know, is an interesting start, just like Disabled Independent Gardeners, the
Yeah.
GAP from Sam Sullivan Foundation and the Disability Foundation. And they're, you know, actually cultivating the land, like the Garden City land itself is still under the sort of control of the Musqueam First Nation. So they've built a relationship with them to allow them to do this. And
Amazing.
yeah, so it's a collaborative project. And anyway, to make a long story short, they've created a gardening space for the elders within the Garden City lands. And that's just something that started too. So
Okay.
pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
wonderful world of gardening.
Yeah. And then, you know, the idea of certain plants being culturally significant. I'm interested because I'm from Alberta, and sage is very important in Alberta, but they've also kind of adopted it as important for them here too. So they see it as a cleansing sort of
Mhm.
herb, and something that you would burn, and you know, that way.
Mhm.
So it's all good, you know, it's all
Yeah.
good. But I don't think sage grows here. It grows like if you plant it, it grows, but
Right.
it's not native to this area.
Not native though. Yeah, totally. Yeah, but yeah, you have to, I guess, plant it yourself in that instance.
Yeah, So, wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm really.
Yeah, it's been awesome chatting here and going through the session. And then, yeah, just like any other questions, as I alluded to, as we go through the season here, just drop them on a YouTube video. Like, I can't tell you how much I enjoy the back and forth on there with different folks that leave comments, both lending a hand, but also just hearing kind of like what's happening in each of our respective gardens. So
Yeah, we're really good to share. And I learned so much from my time volunteering with DIGA in the past. I took a horticultural therapy course at Van Dusen as well. I think it's just early stages for the Richmond Center for Disability. So it'd be kind of interesting. Like today, they wanted to plant their 2 garden beds, and literally all they wanted to plant was lettuce. And I was like, oh my God. So anyway, it's what it is, right? You show up,
totally.
you don't know what's
Yeah.
gonna happen.
I'm a huge believer in, like, planting the things that bring you joy and happiness. And if it's 2
Yeah.
beds of lettuce, then it's 2 beds of lettuce.
Well, I mean, just because it's in such an exposed site, I'm not sure. I was trying to convince them to create a bit of a cover so it's not in so much direct sun. So maybe planting some climbing beans or, a few sunflowers to get some shade, because they'll get absolutely fried if it starts to warm up. So we'll see what happens. But I was kind of looking, they brought like a whole tray of these lettuce seedlings, which is really cute. It's really nice. There was like hundreds of them. And they're all the same kind of lettuce.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I gave them the lecture just like you did about, let's think about the soil and let's feel it. And, does it need amendments? And, it was really sandy and quite compacted. And they were just like sticking the lettuce seedlings in. It's like, no, we've got to turn it. We got to get out the sticks and rocks. Like, where's the, organic matter? And, people just show up and they just have this thing in their mind that's like, let's plant lettuce. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said to, planting it that way and it not going well, because there's beautiful learnings in that as well. Like, okay, what if we took half the bed and just did it as is, but on the other half, let's work some organic matter, some compost in there and see how the 2 of them do. I'm a huge believer in approaching things in that way, not from like a right and wrong perspective, but from just like a learning perspective to see what differences these different variables have on how well plants grow.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just having that sort of sense of control and active engagement, like I really encourage that. So
yeah.
All
righty. Well, Debbie, any other last questions from you? Are you all good on your side?
No, I'm good. I'm still learning.
Okay.
We all are.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I'll go ahead and sign off here from my end, but super nice chatting with the 2 of you here. And yeah, just looking forward to being in touch over the coming months.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.